September 14, 1944, 3047 in the afternoon. A freight train lurched to a stop at the rail, siding outside Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Inside the sweltering wooden cars, 200 German women sat in silence. The air was thick, unbreathable. Through the slats, they could see pine trees stretching toward a colorless sky, heat shimmering off red dirt roads. Everything looked alien, hostile. The doors slid open. Sunlight flooded in, blinding after hours in the dark. American soldiers gestured them out with rifle barrels, their faces hard, unreadable. One by one, the women climbed down onto Louisiana soil. Their legs trembled. Some hadn't stood in 2 days. What happened next would unfold in ways none of them could have predicted. They'd been captured in France after the Allied invasion. Most weren't soldiers. Greta Schumann had worked in a Hamburg munitions factory. Hilda Brenner had been a cook at a military hospital. Young Anna Vogel, just 19, had been a secretary at a supply depot. When the Americans swept through in July, these women were simply there. Enemy nationals in a war zone. Within weeks, they were on ships crossing the Atlantic. Destination unknown. Now they stood in formation on American ground, guards shouting orders they couldn't understand. The heat was different here. Wet, suffocating. It clung to their skin and made breathing feel like drowning. Around them, male prisoners watched from behind double fences topped with barbed wire. Thousands of men, all German, all waiting to see what happened to the women. Camp Ruston sprawled across 80 acres of former farmland. Row after row of tar paper barracks. Guard towers every 100 yards. Signs in English they couldn't read. The women were marched to a separate compound at the eastern edge, isolated from the men by another fence. Their barracks had metal bunks bolted to the floor, thin mattresses that smelled of mildew and disinfectant. No privacy, just rows of beds and eyes that wouldn't meet each other. That first night they were given tin plates with beans and bread. The bread was white, soft, unlike anything they'd eaten in years. Some women ate mechanically, others couldn't swallow. They'd survived bombings, displacement, capture, the terrifying passage across an ocean. Now, they just wanted to know what came next. The camp commander was Colonel James Patterson, a career officer from Virginia with steel-gray hair and a face carved from disappointment. He hadn't wanted women prisoners. They complicated everything. Different barracks, different security concerns, different protocols. But the War Department sent them anyway, and Patterson followed orders. He assigned guards, established routines, and made it clear he expected no trouble. Captain Michael Weber was 34, from a town outside Milwaukee most people had never heard of. He'd been teaching 5th grade when Pearl Harbor happened, enlisted the next day. Now he found himself at Camp Ruston, responsible for the women's compound, trying to figure out what you did with 200 enemy women who spoke no English and had nowhere to go. The first week was processing. Names, identification numbers, medical checks. Weber watched the women shuffle through each station, their faces blank, cooperative but distant. They reminded him of his students during the Depression years, that same hollowed-out look of people who'd stopped expecting good things. On the 8th day, Weber was reviewing intake forms when he noticed something. Education levels. Most women had listed 4 years of schooling, some only 2. Hilda Brenner's form said she'd attended school until age 10, then nothing. Anna Vogel had finished 8th grade. Greta Schumann had 7 years, interrupted by her family's poverty. He sat back in his chair. These weren't educated women. Most had been pulled from school young to work, to help their families survive Germany's endless economic catastrophes. And now they sat in his camp with nothing to do. Days stretched into months, maybe years, just waiting. That night, Weber couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the classroom he'd left behind in Wisconsin. 23 desks, windows facing east, the smell of chalk dust and floor wax. He'd loved teaching. Loved watching that moment when something clicked behind a student's eyes and confusion became understanding. He'd given that up to serve his country, to fight people like these women. But they weren't soldiers. They were clerks and factory workers and cooks. They were barely educated, probably couldn't read well even in German, and they were bored, restless, wasting away behind barbed wire with nothing to occupy their minds. The idea came to him at 2 a.m. It was absurd, impossible. But once it lodged in his brain, he couldn't shake it. What if he taught them English? The next morning, Weber requested a meeting with Colonel Patterson. The colonel's office was Spartan. A metal desk, 2 chairs, an American flag in the corner. Patterson looked up from paperwork with the expression of a man who had no time for interruptions. "This better be important, Captain." Weber stood at attention. "Sir, I've been reviewing the women prisoners' intake forms. Most have minimal education. I'd like to propose we offer English classes." Patterson's pen stopped moving. He looked at Weber like he'd suggested teaching the prisoners to fly. "English classes?" "Yes, sir, 3 times a week. Basic literacy and conversation. It would give them something constructive to do. Reduce disciplinary issues, Captain Weber." Patterson set down his pen carefully. "These are enemy nationals. We're at war with their country. You want to educate them? Sir, the Geneva Convention requires humane treatment. Education falls under. The convention requires we don't abuse them. It doesn't require we turn this into a finishing school." Patterson leaned back. "You understand how this would look? American guards teaching German prisoners to speak our language while our boys are dying on their soil?" Weber had expected this. "Sir, these women aren't soldiers. They're going to be here for years, possibly. Keeping them occupied reduces problems. An educated prisoner is a cooperative prisoner. An educated prisoner is still a prisoner." Patterson studied him. "You're a teacher. Civilian life." "Was, sir. 5th grade. And you miss it." "It wasn't a question." Patterson sighed, rubbed his eyes. "Look, Weber, I understand the instinct. But think about the optics. Think about the men in this camp who'd see us giving special treatment to enemy women. Think about the locals in Ruston who've got sons overseas fighting Germans. I'm not suggesting special treatment, sir. Just basic education. Basic education is special treatment when you're a prisoner of war." Patterson stood, signaling the meeting was over. Request denied. Find something else for them to do. Laundry, sewing, I don't care. But no classrooms. Weber saluted and left. But the idea wouldn't die. For 3 days he tried to let it go. He watched the women in the compound during his rounds. They sat on barrack steps, staring at nothing. Some played cards with a torn deck, others just lay on their bunks, eyes open, waiting for time to pass. The restlessness was building. He could feel it. On September 23rd, Weber made a decision. He didn't request permission again. He simply acted. There was a storage building at the edge of the women's compound, 20 feet by 30, filled with old equipment and broken furniture. Weber had prisoners clear it out. He found a salvaged chalkboard from a schoolhouse that had closed during the Depression. Set it against one wall. Arranged mismatched chairs in rows. The room had 3 windows facing east. Not enough light, but it would do. That evening, Weber walked through the compound and spoke to small groups of women through the fence. His German was rudimentary, mostly learned from a phrase book. But he managed to communicate. English. Lessons, tomorrow. He pointed to the storage building. Some women looked confused, others suspicious. A few, like Greta, looked curious. The next morning, September 24th, 1944, 15 women showed up to the storage building. They stood outside, uncertain whether this was allowed, whether it was some kind of trap. Weber opened the door and gestured them in. They entered slowly, taking seats in the mismatched chairs, eyes darting to the windows as if expecting guards to burst in and end this. Weber stood at the chalkboard. His mouth was dry. He had no curriculum, no textbooks, no approval from anyone, just chalk, and an impossible idea. The women watched him, waiting. He picked up the chalk, wrote one word in large letters, peace. Then he spoke it aloud, peace. The room was silent. Outside, a truck engine rumbled past. Someone coughed. Weber pointed to the word again and repeated it, peace. One by one, hesitantly, the women began to echo it back. Their accents were thick, the sounds unfamiliar in their mouths. Peace, peace. Greta Schumann, sitting in the front row, pronounced it clearly. Peace. Her eyes met Weber's. Something passed between them. Not friendship, not trust, just recognition. He was a teacher. They were students. For the next 90 minutes, that was all that mattered. Weber moved on to other words. Hello, thank you, water, bread. He wrote them on the chalkboard, pronounced them slowly, encouraged repetition. The women were tentative at first, but gradually voices grew stronger. Anna Vogel, in the back, barely whispered. Hilda Brenner, 41 and the oldest, struggled with the sounds but kept trying. When the lesson ended, the women filed out silently. No one thanked him. No one smiled. They simply left, returning to the barracks as if nothing had happened. But Weber noticed 3 things. First, more women were waiting outside, watching. Second, Greta had written the words in a small notebook she'd somehow obtained. Third, as Anna walked past, she whispered one word in English, peace. That night, Colonel Patterson called Weber to his office. Someone had reported the class. Patterson's face was granite. Captain, I explicitly told you no, yes, sir, and you did it anyway, yes, sir. Patterson walked to the window, hands behind his back. For a long moment he said nothing. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. My nephew is in France right now, fighting Germans. You understand that? I do, sir. Then explain to me why I shouldn't discipline you. Weber chose his words carefully. Sir, I believe education is a weapon, maybe the most powerful one we have. Those women in that classroom? For 90 minutes, they weren't enemies. They were students. They were human beings trying to better themselves. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it? The belief that people can be more than what war makes them? Patterson turned. His expression was unreadable. You're putting me in an impossible position, Weber. I know, sir. If I allow this, people will question my judgment. If I stop it, I'm the officer who denied education to people asking to learn. Patterson returned to his desk, sat heavily. You will keep this quiet. No announcements. No expansion beyond that storage building. Classes 3 times a week, no more. Any problems, any complaints from the community, and it ends immediately. Understood? Understood, sir. And Weber? You're responsible for this. If it goes wrong, it's on you. Weber saluted. Yes, sir. He left the office feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff. By October, 23 women were attending classes regularly. Word had spread through the compound in whispers. The storage building that had been empty now held something valuable. Hope, maybe. Or just distraction from the endless waiting. Weber established a routine. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, at 10 a.m. 90 minutes each session. He'd scrounged basic primers from the camp library, children's books with simple sentences and pictures. See the dog. The dog runs. It was humbling, teaching grown women from words meant for 6-year-olds, but they absorbed everything with fierce concentration. Greta Schumann emerged as the natural leader. She was 28. dark-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Before the war, she'd worked in her father's print shop in Hamburg until the RAF bombs turned it to rubble. She'd learned to read German well, had a head for grammar, and she helped the others when Weber's explanations fell short. Sometimes he'd catch her staying after class, practicing pronunciation alone in front of the chalkboard. Hilda Brenner sat in the same seat every lesson, front row, right side. At 41, she was old enough to be mother to most of the others. Her hands were rough from decades of kitchen work, her face lined with exhaustion that went deeper than the war. She struggled with English. The sounds didn't come naturally. But every class she was there, notebook open, pencil gripped tight, refusing to give up. Anna Vogel sat in the back corner. Always the back corner. She was 19, small-boned, with blonde hair she kept tied severely back. She barely spoke, even in German. When Weber called on her, her voice emerged as barely a whisper. But her written work was meticulous. Every letter formed perfectly, every word copied exactly. She was terrified of making mistakes. By mid-October, they'd moved beyond single words to simple sentences. Weber wrote on the chalkboard, "I am learning English." The women repeated it, over and over, until the rhythm became natural. Some laughed at their own accents. Others remained serious, treating each word like it mattered, like it might mean something beyond these walls. Weber found himself thinking about them between classes, not as prisoners, as students. He remembered why he'd loved teaching, the privilege of watching people grow, of offering them tools they could use to build better lives. He thought he'd lost that when he enlisted. But here it was again, in the last place he'd expected. One afternoon, Private Thompson from the guard detail stopped Weber outside the mess hall. Thompson was young, maybe 22, from Georgia. His drawl was thick as molasses. "Captain, is it true you're teaching them Germans to talk American?" Weber measured his response. "I'm teaching basic English literacy, authorized by Colonel Patterson. My brother's in Belgium right now, fighting them people." Thompson's jaw was tight. "Seems strange, us helping them while they're killing ours." "These women aren't killing anyone, Private. They're clerks and factory workers. They're Germans." Thompson spat the word. "My daddy says a German's a German. Don't matter if it's wearing a skirt." Weber kept his voice level. Noted. "Private. Was there anything else?" Thompson walked away, but Weber felt the weight of his stare. This was the problem Patterson had warned him about. Every man in this camp had a brother, cousin, friend overseas fighting Germans. How could they understand why their captain was teaching the enemy to speak English? The answer was, they couldn't. And Weber couldn't explain it in a way that would satisfy them. But he kept teaching anyway. In late October, Louise Garrett appeared at the camp gate. She was in her 50s, a school teacher from Ruston who taught for 30 years before retiring. She'd heard about the classes. News traveled fast in small towns, and she'd brought something. A canvas bag filled with 12 used textbooks, grammar primers, vocabulary builders, a worn dictionary. "These were collecting dust in my attic," she told Weber through the fence. Figured they might be useful. Weber took the bag, feeling the weight of it. "Ma'am, this is incredibly generous." Louise Garrett's expression was complicated. "My son is in the Pacific. Navy. I think about him every day." She paused. "But I also taught for 3 decades. Can't stop believing education matters, even when it's complicated." She turned to leave, then looked back. "Don't tell anyone I brought those. My neighbors wouldn't understand." "I won't, ma'am. Thank you." She nodded and walked away, her back straight, carrying the burden of her choices alone. The textbooks changed everything. Weber could structure real lessons now. Verb conjugations, plural forms, basic conversation patterns. The women devoured the material like they were starving. Greta worked through an entire grammar primer in 2 weeks. Hildy spent her evenings in the barracks laboriously copying vocabulary lists. Even Anna began raising her hand occasionally, her voice still soft but present. Weber started bringing his own teaching materials from Wisconsin. He'd kept them in a footlocker, flashcards he'd made years ago, lesson plans from before the war, a world map that was outdated but still showed continents and oceans. He penned the map to the wall and taught them geography in English. This is America. This is Louisiana. This is Germany. The women stared at the distances between countries, the vast ocean they'd crossed, the impossible journey that had brought them here. November arrived. The Louisiana heat broke, replaced by cooler air that felt like relief. The classroom took on a different quality, more focused, more serious. They weren't just learning words anymore, they were building towards something, though none of them could articulate what. One Monday morning, Greta stayed after class. The other women filed out, but she remained seated, notebook open. Captain Weber? Her English was accented but clear. Yes? Why you teach us? She was choosing words carefully. We are enemy. We are German. Weber pulled up a chair, sat across from her. Before the war, I taught children. 5th grade. That was my life. He paused, searching for words she'd understand. When I see people who want to learn, I can't not teach. It's who I am. Greta nodded slowly. In Hamburg, before bombs, I work with books, printing, my father's shop. Her eyes were distant. I love words. English words are different, but still words. Your English is getting very good. I practice every night. Hildy, she asked me to help her. Anna too. We study together. She met his eyes. This class, it give us purpose? Is correct word? That's the correct word. Thank you, Captain. For purpose. She gathered her notebook and left, leaving Weber sitting alone in the empty classroom, feeling like he'd just been given something more valuable than he'd offered. But not everyone saw it that way. The Ruston Gazette ran an editorial in mid-November. Coddling the enemy, the headline screamed. The writer, a local businessman named Harlan Price, questioned why American resources were being wasted on German women while good American boys died overseas. He called it a disgrace, a betrayal. Within days, 3 protesters showed up outside the camp gates with hand-painted signs. Teach Americans, not Nazis. Remember Pearl Harbor. Colonel Patterson called Weber to his office again. His face was thunderous. I told you, any problems, it ends. Sir, 3 protesters hardly constitutes. 3 today, 30 tomorrow, 300 next week. Patterson threw the newspaper across his desk. You've made my camp a political target, Captain. The mayor called me this morning. The town council wants a meeting. They want explanations. Weber stood rigid. Sir, those women are learning. They're not causing problems. They're model prisoners precisely because they have something constructive to do. I don't give a damn if they're learning calculus and painting masterpieces. Patterson's voice was sharp. This camp exists at the pleasure of this community. We need their cooperation. We need their silence. Your classroom is costing me both. Then what do you want me to do, sir? Patterson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. I want you to understand what you're asking people to accept. You're asking them to watch us educate women from the country that's killing their sons. To them, you're choosing the enemy over your own people. I'm choosing education over ignorance. Sometimes those aren't the choices we get. Patterson sat heavily. I'm ordering a review. Inspector General's office. They'll interview prisoners, assess the program, determine if it's an appropriate use of resources. Until then, classes continue. But Weber? He locked eyes with him. You need to prepare for this to end. The review came in early December. A stern-faced major from the IG's office spent 3 days at Camp Ruston. He interviewed Weber, reviewed lesson plans, spoke to guards. On the 3rd day, he interviewed prisoners. Weber wasn't allowed in the room, but he waited outside, pacing. Greta went in first, then Hild, then Anna, then others. Each one emerged, stone-faced, revealing nothing. When the last woman left, the major gathered his papers and departed without a word to Weber. The waiting was agony. Classes continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The women knew something was happening. They watched Weber carefully, as if trying to memorize him in case he disappeared. Hildy brought him a small wooden cross she'd carved from scrap wood, pressed it into his hand without explanation. Greta wrote thank you in English on the chalkboard before leaving one day. Anna, shy Anna, stopped him after class and whispered, "You are good teacher." On December 15th, Patterson summoned Weber to his office. The IG's report lay on his desk. Patterson's expression was unreadable. The major found no violations of protocol or Geneva Convention requirements. The prisoners report positive morale effects. Educational outcomes are documented and measurable. Patterson paused. He's recommending the program be allowed to continue. Weber felt something unclench in his chest. Sir, however. Patterson held up a hand. He also noted significant community opposition and recommends we minimize public visibility. Classes will continue but remain restricted to current participants. No expansion, no publicity, no interviews with press. You keep this as quiet as possible. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And Weber? You pulled this off. Against odds, against expectations. Patterson almost smiled. Don't make me regret it. Weber saluted, relief flooding through him. You won't, sir. That afternoon, Weber returned to the classroom. The women were already seated, waiting anxiously. When he walked in, they sat up straighter, eyes wide with questions they couldn't yet ask in English. Weber picked up the chalk, wrote on the board, "Classes will continue." The room erupted, not loudly. These were still prisoners, still cautious, but with a release of tension that had been building for weeks. Greta's face split into a rare smile. Hildy put her head in her hands, shoulders shaking. Anna whispered thank you over and over. Weber waited for them to settle. Then he wrote another sentence. Today we learn future tense, because if anything had become clear, it was that these women needed to imagine a future. And language was the key to building one. By Christmas, they'd worked through 3 textbooks. Anna could read simple paragraphs aloud without stumbling. Hilda had memorized over 300 words. Greta was writing complete letters in English, showing them to Weber for correction, her handwriting precise and determined. Weber brought sugar cookies his wife had sent from Wisconsin, passed them around on Christmas Eve. The women sang Silent Night in German and English, voices blending in the small room with 3 windows facing east. For a few minutes, they weren't guards and prisoners. Just people sharing a moment of peace in a world that had forgotten what peace looked like. Outside, snow began to fall, rare for Louisiana. The women pressed against the windows, watching white flakes drift down like memories of home. Weber stood at the back of the room, watching them watch the snow, and thought about what they were building here. Not just language skills, something deeper. A bridge between enemies. Proof that even in war, people could choose to see each other as human. It wouldn't last. He knew that. The war would end eventually. These women would go home. The classroom would be emptied, the chalkboard erased, the textbooks returned to their shelf. But for now, in this moment, they had this. And it was enough. May 8th, 1945. The announcement came over the camp loudspeakers just after noon. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Weber was in the classroom when he heard it. 20 women sat in their chairs, conjugating verbs on paper, practicing the future tense they'd been learning for months. The loudspeaker crackled. Every head lifted. When the words unconditional surrender echoed across the compound, the room went silent. Greta's pencil stopped moving. Hildy's hands fell to her lap. Anna stared at the chalkboard where Weber had written "We will go home" as an example sentence. Now those words meant something different. Real. Terrifying. Weber set down his chalk. "Class dismissed," he said quietly. The women filed out without speaking. Through the window, Weber watched them return to the barracks, moving like people who just learned they were walking toward an uncertain future. Home meant bombed cities, destroyed infrastructure, a defeated country occupied by Allied forces. Home meant confronting what Germany had become. The classroom felt suddenly fragile, temporary, like it had always been a dream that morning's announcement would shatter. Repatriation didn't happen immediately. The logistics of moving thousands of prisoners across the Atlantic took months to organize. The women of Camp Ruston were low priority, civilian workers, not soldiers. June passed. Then, July. The classroom continued, but the quality of attention had shifted. The women were learning English now not for distraction, but for survival. They were going home to a Germany that would be crawling with British, American, French, and Russian occupiers. English might be the difference between eating and starving. Weber adjusted his lesson plans. Less grammar theory, more practical conversation. "I need food." "Where is the hospital?" "I am looking for work." "My family is missing." The sentences were grim, utilitarian, but necessary. In August, Greta approached him after class. Her English was nearly fluent now, her accent still present, but her confidence transformed. "Captain Weber, I want to say something." She paused, choosing words carefully. "In Hamburg, before the war, I worked with my father. We printed books, newspapers. Words were my life." She looked at the chalkboard, at the classroom they'd built together. "The bombs took everything. My father died. My mother died. My brother, I don't know where. When I came here, I was empty, just nothing inside." Weber waited, let her find her way through it. This classroom filled the empty, not with forgetting, with purpose. She met his eyes. "When I go home, I will teach English to children, to anyone who wants to learn, because you showed me that teaching is how we build again, after everything burns down." Weber felt his throat tighten. "You're going to be an excellent teacher, Greta. I learned from excellent teacher." She offered a small smile, then left before he could respond. September brought the repatriation orders. The women would leave in phases over 6 weeks. Greta's group was scheduled for mid-September, Hildy's for early October, Anna's for late October. Weber had exactly 45 days left with them. He made every lesson count. They covered practical scenarios, job interviews, interactions with occupation authorities, how to ask for help, how to explain gaps in work history, how to navigate a world where being German meant being guilty until proven otherwise. The lessons were darker now, less about hope and more about survival. But the women absorbed everything with fierce determination. Hild pulled Weber aside one afternoon in late September. Her English was still rough, grammatically shaky, but understandable. That was all she'd ever wanted. "My son, he is 13, she said slowly. "I not seen him since 2 years. He is with my sister in Munich." She struggled with the next words. "I am afraid he will not remember me, or will remember me wrong. As person who leave him. You didn't leave him, Hildy. You were taken. To him is same thing." She looked at her worn hands. "But I will teach him English, like you teach me." We will learn together. That is something we can build? That's something you can build, Weber confirmed. And Hildy? He'll remember you. Children always remember their mothers. She nodded, not entirely convinced, but holding on to the possibility. Greta's departure came on September 18th. The women being repatriated assembled at dawn with small canvas bags containing their possessions. Not much. A change of clothes, some letters, whatever small items they'd acquired. Greta carried her notebooks, 3 of them now, filled with English vocabulary, grammar rules, phrases she'd practiced until they were perfect. Weber walked to the fence where the women waited for the trucks. Greta stood slightly apart from the others, her face composed, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Captain," she said in English. "For everything." "Write to me," Weber told her. "Let me know how you're doing. I want to know if you're teaching. I will write, I promise." She hesitated, then added, "You saved us, you know. Not our lives. Something more important. You saved your humanity? Yes, that." She picked up her bag. "I will not forget." The trucks arrived. Greta climbed into one, settled onto the wooden bench. As the convoy pulled away, Weber watched until it disappeared down the red dirt road. He never knew if he'd see her again. Hilda left 3 weeks later. Her English was still elementary, but she could read children's books now, could hold basic conversations, could write simple letters. On her last day, she pressed the wooden cross she'd carved months ago back into Weber's hand. "You keep," she said. "For, remember us? I could never forget you, Hild." She nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face, then joined the line of women boarding trucks. Weber stood at the fence long after they'd gone, the small cross warm in his palm. Anna was the last to leave, October 23, 1945. By then, the classroom was nearly empty. Only 5 women remained, scheduled for the final repatriation flight in November. Weber taught them anyway, right up until the end. On Anna's final day, she approached him after class. She'd transformed over the past year, still quiet, still careful, but no longer paralyzed by fear of mistakes. She'd learned to speak, even though her voice remained soft. "Captain Weber, I wrote something," she said, pulling out a piece of paper. "In English. Can I read? Please." Anna smoothed the paper, took a breath, and began. Her accent was thick, but every word was clear. "When I came to America, I was afraid. I did not speak. I did not want to be seen. But you gave me words. English words. These words made me strong. Now I go home, but I take the words with me. Thank you for giving me voice." Weber had to look away for a moment. When he trusted himself to speak, he said, "You always had a voice, Anna. I just helped you find it." She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into her pocket. Then she did something that surprised him. She extended her hand for a handshake. Weber took it. Her grip was firm, certain, the handshake of someone who knew her own worth. "Goodbye, Captain Weber. Goodbye, Anna. Good luck." She picked up her bag and walked toward the trucks, her spine straight, her steps steady. Weber watched until she was gone, and then the classroom was empty. Just him and the chalkboard and the 3 windows facing east. He erased the board slowly, 20 months of lessons disappearing with each stroke. When it was clean, he set down the eraser and walked out, closing the door behind him. The building would be converted back to storage. The desks returned to wherever they'd come from. The chalkboard probably sold for scrap. Within weeks, no physical evidence would remain that anything special had happened here. But Weber knew better. The first letter arrived in June 1946. Greta's handwriting on the envelope, a German postmark. Weber opened it carefully. Dear Captain Weber, it began in careful English. I am home now in Hamburg. There is much destruction. But I have found work with the British Occupation Office. They need translator. My English is helping. I am also teaching in the evenings. Children whose schools were bombed. We meet in church basement. I teach them English and they teach me hope. Thank you for showing me this was possible. Yours truly, Greta Schumann. Weber read the letter 3 times, then carefully filed it in a folder he'd labeled students. More letters came. Hilda wrote in German. Her English wasn't strong enough for letters, but her sister translated. She'd found her son. He was taller, more serious, but he'd remembered her. They were living with her sister's family in Munich. She was teaching him English phrases every night before bed. It was slow, but they were building something together. Anna's letter came in 1947. She'd left Germany, immigrated to America under a refugee program sponsored by a church in Pennsylvania. She was working as a translator for refugee services, helping other German immigrants navigate their new country. I use my English every day, she wrote. I help people find their voices, like you helped me find mine. I am thinking of going to college. Is this possible for someone like me? I hope you are well. Thank you for believing I could learn. Anna. Weber wrote back to every letter, encouraged Anna to pursue college, congratulated Greta on her teaching, sent Hilda children's English primer through her sister. The correspondence continued for years. Not frequently. Sometimes months would pass between letters, but steadily. A thread connecting that classroom in Louisiana to scattered lives across Germany and America. In 1952, Greta wrote that she'd opened a small school in Hamburg, 40 students, teaching English, German, mathematics. The British occupation was ending, but the need for English remained. She'd married a teacher from Bremen. They were expecting their first child. In 1954, Hilda's sister wrote that Hilda had passed away. Heart failure. But before she died, she'd taught her son enough English that he'd been accepted to a university program with American exchange students. She never stopped being grateful for what you taught her, the letter said. She spoke of you often. In 1959, Anna sent a photograph. Her university graduation. Bachelor's,